Alice in Wonderland, Snow White, Beauty and the Beast. In fiction, kings and queens who are a little on the cuckoo side of things make pretty great entertainment. Unfortunately, as you'll be reminded in today's Bumblebee video, the top 10 kings and queens who changed history, it's anything but cinematic, having chunks of the world controlled by someone who is irrationally unstable and needs a groom of the stool. And our first irrational nut coming in at number 10 is the animal. It's never a good sign when a mother's dying words are, "Somebody bring me a sword and cut me open to see how this animal came out of me." Also, never good that she's dying because of her son. But when it came to the Liu Song dynasty, they love two things: killing their own family and killing everyone else's family. So it starts with how this kid, Kianfei, is a prisoner to his uncle as a child, and a bunch of real creepy, uncool grooming stuff happens. So his dad kills his uncle to set Kianfei free. You think he'd be grateful, but Kianfei showed his gratitude when he became emperor at the age of 15, and his first move was to make all of his dad's portraits have cartoonishly large noses. Oh, and he did get rid of every law his father had ever made, all at once, and immediately, so it threw the country into a literal effing purge. While that's going on, Kian proceeds to start picking off family and staff members in an exceedingly violent manner. E.g., the nobleman whose eyes Kianfei scooped out, put in a jar of honey, and called his pick a little ghost eyes. The servant he killed because she looked like a woman in a dream he died in. He left some of his uncles alive, but put them in cages on display. Healthy. This all feels very healthy. Especially when you add in the depraved, lustuous behavior, ordering female relatives to have intercourse in front of him, and then killing those who refuse. So I feel it goes without saying he wasn't on the throne for long. Kianfei gets smoked relatively quickly, not by family, not by the military, not by nobility. He was killed by a group of his attendants. Just to drive that home, a group of servants killed the emperor and nobody objected. It was just a lot of, okay, yeah, alright, we can work with that. No, you guys ain't in trouble, take the day off. So with the entire family pretty much dead, one caged uncle is put on the throne, and he promptly killed every family member that was left, except for his young nephew, who succeeded him, only to be killed immediately by a general. And then the general began the Qi dynasty. Now on to number 9 for our favorite lunatic and the terrible tantrums. This whole video could have all just been SARS. These rulers were raised under conditions that guaranteed to make anyone a sociopath. Ivan the Terrible's father died when Ivan was only 3, and his mother was poisoned when he was 8. During his younger years, corrupt noblemen governed the land and starved, beat, and neglected Ivan and his brother. He, in turn, took his anger out on small animals, which he would throw off of the roofs of palaces. Good practice for that time as a teenager, when he pimp-walked his ass into the throne room, chokeholded the nobleman leader, and physically threw the man to his trained and hungry hunting dogs. You think that's bad? Psycho behavior, lightning round, baby, let's go. So, when Ivan suspected a nobleman wanted the throne, he dressed the man as the king, put him on the throne, and gutted him there. Ivan created a special police force that dog heads hanging from their saddles and could kill anyone at any time in public. Once when Ivan heard a rumor that a town called Novgorod was rebellious, he killed every single person in the town, and then sewed the town's archbishop up inside a bear skin, like this is the end scene of Midsummer, and as dogs hunt the archbishop Bearman down. It's hard to write all that and then use the phrase conditions deteriorated, but somehow conditions deteriorated. He was known to spend hours banging his face against the stone floor found in front of religious icons. What truly changed history, however, is he goes after his pregnant daughter-in-law. His actions cause her miscarriage, and his son, also named Ivan, berates his father. His father then beats his head in with a scepter, immediately ending the ancient Rurik line of nobility. With the only strong heir to the throne dead, Russia descended into chaos after Ivan's death, and at last nobles could place a family of their choice on the throne, an heir called Michael Romanov. Okay, it's lady time. Number 8 is religious mania Maria. Maria of Portugal, unlike pretty much everyone else on this list, had an idyllic childhood. Her father, the King of Portugal, paid a massive amount of attention to both her and her sisters. But while the king was winning Dad of the Year, his minister, the Marquis of Pombal, managed the country, which apparently meant imprisoning everyone who questioned him and killing anyone left over. I'll give him credit for still being loyal to the king, however, when someone tried to smoke said king, the Marquis rounded up his strongest political enemies, tormented them into confessions, broke their bones on a scaffold, and then burned the scaffold down. Unfortunately, that genetic religious mania starts kicking her ass pretty hard once Maria is in her early 20s. Naturally, this is also when she ascended to the throne, and the horrific acts actions of the Marquise in the name of her father convinced Maria that he is in hell for being a bad king and she would join him. To alleviate her guilt, she amnestied all the political prisoners and gave them positions in her court. Super sweet gesture, but spending decades in an 18th century Portugal's palace prison does not do much for the mind. So, most of these counselors and courtiers were absolutely insane. When within the space of a year, her eldest son, her only living daughter, and her two closest ministers all died, Maria completely fell apart. Some days she would embrace the fact that she's already damned, talking in a unchaste manner. Some days she would pace the halls screaming. Her 26-year-old second son is made regent, but he was dead useless with no ability to reform an entire court of lunatics. Naturally, this meant the country was in no shape to meet Napoleon in 1807, so when he marched on him, the entire family fled to Brazil and Portugal became Napoleon's. Number 7 is how one man changed the line of succession for the psychologist's wife. Peter the Great was, in many ways, a wonderful sovereign. Passionately committed to both his country and his own education, he spent much of his imprisoned childhood learning army tactics and designing ships. As an adult, he toured Europe, learning about the latest advances in science so that he could bring them back to Russia. Peter the Great was pretty great. But like many with great intellect, he'd take it and his impatience with those who didn't understand it a little too far. When he was learning dentistry, he would practice on nobles without their consent. When a group of attendants were upset while watching the dissection of a corpse, he ordered them to walk up to the corpse and take a bite out of it. His childhood traumas also made him fanatical about loyalty because Peter was the child of the former Tsar's second wife and had to watch the relatives of the first wife throw his family off a roof. Peter became so serious about this loyalty, he had his own son tormented to death for temporarily fleeing to Sweden. One person he trusted though was his wife Catherine. Catherine was a Cinderella story that emerged from a horror movie. Eventually, she met the Tsar, who became enthralled with her, and Peter had fits of terror due to seeing his family being tossed off the roof as a kid, and during those fits, Catherine was the only one who could soothe him. So, with his love of loyalty and pride in family, Peter decreed that the Tsar should be able to name his own successor, and that's exactly what Catherine was when Peter died. For number 6 is 2 for 1, a king and a queen. Let's call it the creation of Catherine. Hilariously, this couple's names were also Peter and Catherine, but unlike the previous set, who loved each other, these two were flighty nightmares. Peter was a bit delayed. With no parental contact and a crap upbringing, the dude developed into a creepy blend of child and sociopath. He didn't consummate the marriage to Catherine literally ever. This poor girl gets shipped from Germany to play toy soldiers in bed with him for 9 years. He also tormented animals in training a pack of hunting dogs by beating them and conducting military trials and hangings for the rats he found eating his toys. This guy's brain was so pea-sized that knowing the king liked watching fire, a minister set his own house alight to keep the king distracted while Catherine was giving birth to their definitely illegitimate child. While most crazy tsars kept their throne for illogically long, Peter got deposed pretty damn fast. Why? He was crazy like a Prussian, not like a Russian. He was meant to be the Swedish heir, and he was raised to dislike Russia. Smoking Peter meant it was time for a lady leader, and Catherine, who was actually born in Prussia, had spent the first few years of her marriage vigorously Russianizing herself and cultivating the Russian army, who preferred a Prussian that had decided she was Russian to a Russian that decided he was Prussian. Number 5, we finally leave Russia onto France, who signed up for centuries. Centuries of what? BS. You're in for a ride. So, Charles IV was the king for effing ever. During that time, a united, prosperous, and powerful country fell into civil war and chaos. Charles began having spells not too long after his brother thought it would be funny to light all the king's friends on fire while they're dressed as wild men, which for some reason incorporated tar. Charles became convinced he was made of glass and would shatter if he moved too quickly, so he would hardly move for hours on end. He became incoherent and paranoid. During these spells, Louis, his brother, became the de facto king. This made him a formidable opponent. Anyone who would make a move to weaken the Count of Valois would find a month or so later they were the enemy of the acting king of France. One night, John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, decided to put an end to Looney Lewis. He hired a group of conspirators to hack him to death in the street, which they did, but while still wearing their work uniforms like it's goddamn amateur hour. So it's not long before people found out exactly who killed Lewis, and the nation falls into civil war. John the Fearless went to the English for military support, which they happily gave him in exchange for land in France. Charles the Mad had to declare an English king the heir of France to help end the drama, but the treaty doesn't hold because of turmoil in English court, and it gives England and France an excuse to go to war for what? The next 100 years? Number 4 is our girl, the last Empress of China. A little luck gets her journey started. As a low-ranking concubine to the Emperor, she gave birth to the Emperor Xianfang's only son in 1856, a feat his wife, the Empress, couldn't accomplish. The Emperor immediately raised her status, gave her a privileged life, and made her son, Emperor Tongzi, the heir. After Xianfang died, when her son was just 6, the new Empress Cixi orchestrated a coup, grabbing the power from a council of elders. Once Tongzi ascended, Cixi became a Empress Dowager and a unusually powerful joint ruler. After Tongzi died very suddenly without an heir, Cixi had a backup ready and installed her 4-year-old nephew. This consolidated her power yet again, and she served as the de facto leader of the vast Qing Empire from 1861 until she died in 1908. During her reign, she stomped out rebellions, civil wars, and supported the self-strengthening movement, a period of institutionalization, economic, and military reforms, which helped transform China from an aged society into a more modern superpower on a global scale. Now over to the Ottomans for number 3, which will be coming out of the cage be doing not so fine. Our tale begins with a group of brothers, the most prominent among them being Ahmed I and Mustafa. Ahmed puts his brother Mustafa in the cage, a tower with no windows, a brick wall built over the door, and no human contact. Don't be scared, guys. This is what all Ottoman empires did with their siblings. They also disfigured their faces sometimes. Pick your poison. So, Ahmed craps out a few sons, then drops at the age of 28. So out of the cage Mustafa came, 14 years after being put into basically an above-ground pit. What could go wrong? Well, you could argue it's kinda odd. He walked around with 2 naked servant girls at all times, but the real problem was he had a habit of giving important positions to random people he met in life. Without a strong, organized central government, the empire started to crumble. Back in the cage you go, but with 2 women this time. He was replaced by Ahmed's oldest son, Osman. The young man might have made a decent ruler, but he banned drinking and smoking and intercourse in the army. Do I need to explain the problem? Anyways, they sentenced him to death via the boy crusher, which you can learn about in my video, The Top 10 Brutal Punishments from the Ottoman Empire. Out of the cage came Mustafa again, and at this point he had a habit of sitting and giggling to himself. In between giggle fits, he'd go around looking for his dead nephew, forgetting the man was dead, and when he was told he had other ones, he'd kill them. He also went back to his old tricks, appointing random people to important positions, and the officials in the provinces were one step away from declaring themselves local kings. Put a cap on thing, the Safavid Persian Empire attacked and grabbed what's now Iraq. Back into the cage Mustafa went. Still in the Ottoman Empire, number 2 is bankruptcy and a 2-decade war. Someone had to succeed the cage man, and that was what Murad IV did, one of the nephews that Mustafa hadn't killed. Maybe because the dude was ruthless. His last act before dying was ordering the death of his last surviving brother. He had nothing against Ibrahim, but he simply believed that their line was cursed by madness and needed to be annihilated. Sadly for 279 women, as you'll learn, Ibrahim's mother successfully pleads for his life. Ibrahim spends his entire life in the cage with only occasional contact with people. He came out with what can be tactfully described as a lust for life. Made frantic by years of deprivation, he acquired everything like an animal, including 280 concubines in a harem. One day, he saw a cow's hoo-ha and had a cast made of it and circulated it through the empire for a woman that matched. When he found her, she became his favorite concubine and he named her Sugar Lump. Sugar didn't care for competition, so she told the psychotically jealous Ibrahim that one of the other women in the harem was unfaithful, but only she didn't know which one. Ibrahim's answer was having all 280 tied up in sacks and thrown into the Bosphorus River. Only one survived when her sack came undone and she was taking aboard a French freighter bound for Paris. What finally did Ibrahim in was fanatically acquiring all the gold and jewels he could, pulling from temples and threatening ministers. Then Ibrahim started a war with Venice. He soon couldn't pay the Janissaries and they sent him back to the cage. The war with Venice outlasted him by 22 years. And last but never least, number 1 is the Bumper Car King, aka the story of how Justin II lost half of Italy while playing bumper cars. Yeah, real story. Evidently, he joins pretty much every monarch on this list as having their formative years isolated and terrified of sudden violent death. Doesn't help being a Byzantine heir and having your parents be the notorious couple Justinian and Theodora. Eventually, all their heirs run out except for Justin, who inherits a pretty crappy situation, seeing as his dad's foreign policy was to expand military as far as he could and then pay his new neighbors not to attack him. And shocker, tribute costs a lot. Unfortunately, the empire was going through some tough financial times and Justinian had been borrowing to cover his annual payment. Ottoman. Justin believed he could do better by just refusing to pay the Persians while pitting the tribes in the north against each other. It was then under the strain of multiple nearing armies that Justin had a nervous breakdown. Ministers would be asking him what to do, and he'd claim to hear voices and then climb under his bed to escape them. On bad days, he would violently grab at people, biting them on the arms or the face. Legend has it that he literally ate a couple servants. In desperation and self-preservation, the servants tried to think of a couple ways to keep the emperor distracted from eating them, so they came up with the throne on wheels. Servants raced him around the halls of the palace on the throne, trying to keep him amused with the speed. When he had guests, they'd also get to experience zooming around on wheeled seats, aka bumper cars. In the end, Justinian II fared pretty well, perhaps better than he deserved considering his last words as emperor were complaints about his servants. Alrighty, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe to see more from us, and until next time, better watch your back for conniving heirs.